Okay. All right, here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Mighty Blaze Celebrity Conversations. I am your host, Jane Roper, and we are so excited to have two wonderful writers with us here today. We have Mark Pryor and we have Wendy Walker. Both of them usually we just have one author who has a brand new book out, but this time both of these guys have brand new books out, so this is very exciting. I will do some brief intros of you both, Wendy and Mark. Welcome to you both, and then we'll turn it over to you guys to chat away. And those of you who are watching, sorry, I'm being very wobbly today. I'm antsy. Those of you who are watching, if you have questions, please feel free to throw them into the comment thread, and we will do our best to get them to our authors. But in the meantime, just sit back and enjoy. So let's start with Mark. Mark Pryor is a mystery author and assistant district attorney for Travis County, Texas, which is pretty amazing to be able to do both of those things simultaneously and not go crazy. You must not sleep. Do you not sleep? Are you a non-sleeper?
I just don't do anything very well is all it is.
Okay, well, all right, so he's best known for his mystery novels featuring Hugo Marston, a former FBI agent from Texas and now head of security at the US Embassy in Paris. And many of these books, I think almost all, take place in Paris, right?
One except two, yeah. There's one in Barcelona and one in London.
Okay. He's also written two novels set in Austin, Hollow Man and Dominic, and is the author of the nonfiction book As She Lay Sleeping, based on the 1985 cold case murder of Natalie Antonetti, which he successfully prosecuted in 2011. Mark's most recent book, released just last Tuesday, is The French Widow, which is his 9th Hugo Marston novel. Mark grew up in Hertfordshire, England, and now lives in Austin, Texas, with his wife and 3 children. And your bio says that you moved to the US in 1994, mostly for the weather. How's that working out?
Yeah, it depends what time of year you ask me that question, but right now it's actually not too bad. So
yeah, it's probably lovely in Austin right now. So cool. Well, welcome and congrats on The French Widow. Glad to have you here. And Wendy Walker is the author of the psychological suspense novels All Is Not Forgotten, Emma in the Night Before, and Don't Look for Me, her latest. Her novels have been translated into 23 languages and topped bestseller lists both nationally and abroad. They have been selected by the Reese Witherspoon Book Club, the Today Show, and the Book of the Month Club, and have been optioned for both television and film. Wendy holds degrees from Brown University and Georgetown Law School and has worked in finance in several areas of law. As a former family law attorney with training in child advocacy, Wendy draws from her knowledge of trauma and psychology to write compelling and complex stories and characters. Wendy's newest book, Don't Look for Me, which was also released just last week, was on multiple must-read and most anticipated lists, including this one. This one, oh, there it is. This one I love. I had to mention this one specifically because this one made me laugh. Newsweek's 25 must-read fall fiction and nonfiction books to escape the chaos of 2020. It's like, yes, yes.
Yes.
A.J. Flynn, best-selling author of The Woman in the Window, calls it addictive. BookReporter.com says, Don't Look for Me is one of the most legitimately thrilling and terrifying suspense novels I've ever read. Although this is not the sort of mystery where the conclusion comes totally out of left field, I feel confident in saying that very few readers will guess it. So no spoilers. No spoilers here. So welcome to you, but welcome, Wendy, and welcome to you both. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mark, I'll turn it over to you to get things rolling.
Cool, because I have questions.
Oh, okay.
Every time I go into these things, Wendy, I always want to come up with brilliant, incisive questions, but it seems to me that people generally kind of want to know the same things. So forgive me if my questions are not super original. But the first thing I want you to do is, because I appreciate when people give me this opportunity, is to describe the book. Because I'm going to do it in case I say something you don't want me to say. So describe your book.
Okay. So Don't Look for Me is the story of Molly Clark. She's a wife and mother who's driving home and she disappears in a small town about 2 hours before she gets back home. And everyone soon comes to believe that she has walked away from her life. And there are a lot of backstory reasons and statistics and evidence that support that theory. So while her family doesn't completely stop looking for her, and they have private investigators and whatnot, the police have stopped looking, and they have made this assumption. 2 weeks later, her daughter Nicole, who's 21, she gets a new lead that sidetracks the police tip line and comes directly to her, that she believes to be legitimate. And she goes back to this very small, desolate, insular town, determined to find her mother at all cost. And it's told in a split narration with different time frames. So you are with Molly from the night she disappears all the way to the end of the book. And then you are with Nicole starting 2 weeks later. And you follow her story, and eventually the time frames converge and the chapters keep alternating until the end of the book. So it's got some ramped up suspense mechanisms, but there's also a big emotional punch because of what this family has been through and the reasons Molly Clark was presumed to have walked away from her life, and what the 2 women are now fighting for to get back. So hopefully it is the true escape from everything that you want to forget in 2020.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, and it's forgive me if it sounds like I'm scolding you a little bit, but I took a trip recently to Wyoming with the family, and I took 2 books with me. I was going to read your book the first week, and then Eric Larson's book the second week. I finished your book on day 2. It was just, I get to the end of the chapter, I'm like, okay, 1 more chapter, and then I'm going to go do something else. But
yeah, that's nice. I actually like to hear that, because while I don't, I don't like to write books that people are just skimming to get to the end, but I like to write them in a way that does capture your attention and doesn't bog you down in the narration, so that it's moving quickly, and you can read it quickly and get that satisfaction of one more chapter and get to the end. So I like to hear when people read it in a couple of days or one sitting. So
yeah, no, definitely not something you skim through. And I like that. I think the way you structure it with Molly and Nicole telling their stories, because you get to the end of a Molly chapter and you're like, so what's Nicole doing right now? And then you're like, oh, now I know that. Wait, but Molly was on the, yeah, Chester, yeah. So I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So where did the idea for this one come from?
So this is the first book that actually was inspired by a real moment in my life. And I feel strange talking about it, because I worry people think I'm a little like off kilter or something, but I guess you have to be to write these books. But I was having a moment. Like I was actually, the first chapter of Molly's story I drew from this moment in my life. It was a few years ago. There was just a lot of stuff going on personally in my life as a single mom, and my kids were getting older. And when your kids, get into their teen years, things happen to them that you can't control and you can't fix. They, whether it's a breakup with their first, girlfriend or boyfriend, or bullying, or in this case, it was a sports game that I drove 4 hours to see, and my son was riding with the team on the bus, so I was alone, and it was just a really rough game with bad ref calls and a lot of heckling from the sidelines from kids from the other school that was cruel. It was not like cheering; it was really personal. It got ugly. They lost the game in the last second. It was just like, so much about it was just wrong and unsportsmanlike from all corners. And there's nothing you can do about that as a parent. That's not, the coaches are there for the reason. It's something that your child has to learn to accept. And I'm driving home, and I'm just so angry about this game. So my emotions, so I have that big piece of emotional stuff going on, like anger that the world has hurt my child and I can't do anything about it. And then that started spinning into like what good am I? This has been my life's work, is to protect my children. If I can't even do that, I'm worthless and powerless. And, and then there's nothing to get you out of that, because you're just driving for 4 hours on these back roads that all look the same. And, you can't go do the laundry or go for a run or watch TV. You can't do anything to get yourself out of that rabbit hole that your thoughts keep taking you down. And then on top of that, a heightened level of anxiety, which I think we can all relate to right now. Like, I think right now, I feel like our emotional cups are all full right now. I mean, I drop a dish towel and I'm, ready to go and, murder someone. So that, I was like that in my life. And so this on top of that, it was just it was really emotionally overwhelming. And so I'm at this gas station and in this small town, and these towns take on a life of their own in a book like this, because while it's a fictional town, it's very much based collectively on this long strip of road that goes all the way into upstate New York, and a lot of really economically depressed towns that have been left to decay because they're along a river that used to be there for commerce and like many, many years ago. And so, the town is sort of, downtrodden, and then I'm at the gas station, but I see this road and it's just going off with cornfields and it goes on forever. And my brain had this thought to like walk down the road. And it was the kind of thought you have when your phone isn't working and you have the thought that you want to just chuck it at the wall. I mean, I'm sure as a lawyer in the courtroom, you've had moments where you're like, I'm going to jam this pencil into that, you're just, no, I'm not going to. But it's like you just get, you get an impulse, right? That's coming from a surge of emotion. And so I got back in the car, and of course, as a writer, you grab hold of things like that and you think, ooh, that was interesting. I wonder if that happens to other people. And I wonder if it ever gets so intense that they act on it. And so I started doing research, and I realized that first of all, you can probably talk to this, but most missing person cases end up being resolved that the person walked away and eventually came back or didn't. But most cold missing person cases, that is the end result, that the person has voluntarily walked away from his or her life. And that, combined with the psychological research on these rogue thoughts that come into our mind, which is so fascinating, but it's basically, it's like the powerful emotions tap into our fight or flight instinct, which is so primitive and powerful. And we don't really need it as much as we used to, but it's still there because evolution is, really slow to catch up to, our socioeconomic situation now. And it taps into that, and then it overrides the rational part of the brain. And they call it emotional hijacking of your thoughts. And I'm sure a lot of criminal behavior. I don't know if this is a defense. Has anyone used this as a defense? I want to know, because
Emotional hijacking.
Emotional hijacking, like where you have lost control of your rational brain. And actually, it used to be a defense to violent behavior if you found out that the person that you attacked was having an affair with your spouse, and if it was in the heat of the moment. That used to be, I don't know if it's still a viable defense, but when I was in law school, I remember reading about that it's acceptable that you lose control of your rational thinking brain. And so that's sort of what happens to Molly Clark. I gave her a terrible backstory. I gave her the worst backstory you could give a character, which was hard to do. I gave her a child who had died. I made her feel responsible for the death of that child. It was the anniversary of the child's death. The family's been falling apart. She had a fight with her daughter. Her son ignored her. She thinks her husband doesn't love her anymore. And she feels like she's destroying what's left of her family. So I gave her like all these thoughts, so that people would understand why she had this moment of emotional hijacking, left her car, started walking down this road, and that's what puts her in danger. So all this like happens in 5 pages of the first chapter. so that you understand why she takes this ride from a stranger. And but then it is all in the book as she starts to fight to get her life back, because she has to fight to get out of where she's being held, and her daughter has to fight to find her. And it's as if they realize they're fighting for this moment, but they're also fighting to reclaim their family and what's happened over the last 5 years. Anyway,
Yeah.
that was really long. So hopefully everyone hasn't like fallen asleep who's watching, but I'm very curious. Is that still like a defense in the law? Have you ever had a case where someone has claimed that?
Yes. So the way it works in Texas, as you know, every state has its own set of criminal laws. And the way it works here is if I'm prosecuting somebody for murder, but they prove that, all I have to do is prove it was intentional, that's first degree murder, first degree felony. But if they can prove that it was sudden passion, that's the phrase.
That's the word, right?
So like you say, you walk in on your spouse in bed with somebody else and then you kill them. Then that reduces the punishment level down. Instead of life in prison, the maximum is 20 years. So we don't see it that often, but it's there, and I've come across.
It's so interesting. I came across that while I was doing my research as well. So yeah. Well, that's where the book started.
No, it's interesting, but and one of the things I think that makes it relatable is, I don't know if you came across in your research, but it really seems to me like I would bet a lot of people have that moment. A lot of mothers, because I know in my own family, like that, not that I'm lazy and good for nothing, but my wife does a lot of stuff for the family, for the kids. We both have full-time jobs, but I have this writing career, and I'm inherently lazy. But so when everything falls on the woman, and then suddenly the kids are either teenage and ungrateful or just not there, I can imagine that there's that sense, that sort of void, that vacuum of like, wait, who am I and what am I doing here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, and it's actually the walking away scenario is actually very common. No, I shouldn't say very common, but it is with women who disappear. It seems to be a recurring theme of being overwhelmed and feeling worthless, feeling helpless, feeling unappreciated, and so I think it's definitely. Especially during, the pandemic, where we're all, the amount of housework and childcare that has now, fallen upon everyone, in addition to trying to do their work, we're on overload. So I think the book is really striking a chord, because a lot of people have had that thought of wanting to chuck their phone at the wall, or just scream or whatever. I think of it as like your sort of emotional cup. It's just totally full all the time. And every drop that wants to come in sets you right over the edge. So
I think it's a practical matter though. It got me thinking about people walking away from their lives. Do you think anybody can do that anymore? Everything's so interconnected, everything's so online. Is it possible to walk away and stay away?
Yeah. Well, so I had to do a lot of, I'm sure you have to deal with technology in your novels as well, right? Why don't they have a cell phone? Where's the CCTV, right? Especially over in Europe. Where's the CCTV footage that sees everything all the time? So it's always, I love British shows, and every show, it's like, oh, he must have known where the camera was, because just out of view of the CCTV. So I had to deal with her cell phone, and I had to deal with her car, and there was a storm, which is one of the reasons that she ends up taking the ride. She leaves her cell phone in the car because she runs out of gas right before the gas station. So she hasn't really been paying attention. The light's been on, back roads. The gas station, I think it's like 100 yards away, or I don't know. It's real. She can get there. She can see it. So she leaves her phone because it's pouring rain, and she doesn't want her phone to get wet, and it's charging. And she's just going to go ask them for a tank of gas, run back, do the thing. And she gets to the gas station, and it's been it's closed for the storm. So I got rid of her cell phone, and then I got rid of her car keys and her car, because now sees this road. She starts walking down it because she's had this emotional hijacking moment. And then the place where she's taken has, there's no landline, and they're sort of off the grid, a little bit off the grid. So, you know, there are technological things you have to sort of deal with. But if you were to try to really walk away, and this is what, you know, what they talk about, they're monitoring her credit card, and the plot, you know, there's a lot of plot points that deal with that, to sort of misdirect the police. But yes, what do you do for money? And you're going to get spotted on a camera somewhere. And if you have a car, the Easy Pass is everywhere you go. You don't even know where they are anymore, because they've stopped. You know, you just drive under something and you've been charged $8 for, you know, whatever, going under the Easy Pass. So yeah, I think there's a lot of technology now that we have to, as writers, work around. But you just do it. I don't know. You figure it out.
I think for the people who write the legal thrillers, like the courtroom stuff, it must be especially difficult, because my job, frankly, has been made so much easier by that stuff. If I can get hold of a defendant's cell phone, I have the whole life, where they were, what they bought, what they took pictures of. And most of them, to be honest, will share the picture of themselves with the gun and all the money on Facebook. Make it super easy. But yeah, as a writer, you can only have your cell phone battery run out so many times, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah, I mean, the cell phone is really a problem. In my last novel, it just runs out, it dies. So it's with her, but it's died. And, you know, I think as a reader, you just come to accept it. Like, okay, if this is about somebody who they can't find, all right, you get a pass. I think writers, you get a pass. Like, they're going to have to do something with the cell phone, okay? Yeah. Like, we just accept that. And there are only so many, and you don't want to make it, you know, we don't want to make a big deal about it. And we do. My phone dies all the time. Mm-hmm. I leave it in the car sometimes when I go into the grocery store, but you know, what are you going to do? It's like you have to deal with technology, and I think it's one of those things where you get a pass on some things. But yeah, courtroom dramas, I would imagine the amount of evidence and the sleuthing that goes on has been reduced because of all of that.
Uh-oh, is Mark frozen?
Oh,
he's frozen.
Okay.
While he's getting unfrozen, I was going to say, Wendy, that I think authors have always had these challenges, right? So it used to be, if you were sending a message across the Atlantic, the ship sank. You know?
Right.
So
yes.
I think it's always been something people have had to work around. So
yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think that's true, and it's you know, it shouldn't get in the way of the story, because you know, we take. You just accept these things when you're reading a thriller, and if it's not a major plot point that's unbelievable, then you know you just get past it really fast. So I think that's really the only thing that I had to deal with. It was her car. They find her car, mm-hmm. and they find, you know, they find some other things, and but it was interesting plotting it, and that's one thing that I know some people don't plot. They sort of just, you know, they call them pantsers. I don't know if you're a pantser or a plotter, but I have to plot because otherwise I'll run into those things, and then I'll wonder where I should have dealt with it, and then I'll have to go back and deal with it. So I try to plot out all of the pieces of evidence that I need mm-hmm. to be giving the reader, and all of the red herrings I'm setting up, and all of the misinformation and the real information, and where it's going to go, so that it flows naturally. Yeah. And so I try to do that and plot it all out, so I don't get caught, you know, in a situation where I have forgotten to tend to a cell phone. Right. Mark, we were just talking about whether you're a plotter or a pantser. So do you want to?
Yes.
I mean, by the way, someone needs to come up with a better word than pantser, because it's just, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry about the disappearance. I can be
Yeah.
up all day, working all day, but as soon as I do one of these things, the internet goes out for 20 seconds.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah.
All good.
I basically start with the premise. I know who is killed, I know who kills them, and I know why. But that's it.
Really? Wow.
And I know, Wendy, you're very much a plotter, aren't you?
Yes, I was just saying I plot everything out because I don't know if it's from being like from law school when you're writing. I was not trained as a writer, so I was trained to write in law school. That's where I really learned to write. And the writing it's an interesting combination of storytelling and like a Jenga tower, right? So you have to put in case law, and you have to put in the facts of the case, and you have to address opposing case law or statutes, and make your arguments, but you have to persuade. And actually, one of the most interesting it was a volunteer position actually at the ACLU, and this is in honor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I have been telling this story, but I saw her in the Supreme Court during oral argument, actually 3 times. And one of the times that I was there, a case was being argued by former colleagues who had let me volunteer with them at the ACLU. And when I moved out to the suburbs and quit practicing law to be with to start a family, I really wanted to do something useful with my law degree as a volunteer. I wasn't, and then just to stay current so that I could transition back in or find an area of practice that was more family friendly. And nobody would take me locally, like nobody. The only volunteer work they will let women do in the suburbs is raise money. So every place I went to, like, can I help you draft things? Can I help you do research? How about, can you have all your friends over to the house for a dessert party, and we'll send one of our reps, and then they can all write checks to us. It was really frustrating. So I went back into the city to the ACLU, and they were like, sure, what do you want to do? I'm like, I'll do whatever you want. They had me, I went in 2 or 3 days a week, and then I would copy cases. We didn't even have the internet. So I would like photocopy cases and stuff, and then I would work on pieces of briefs or affidavits. And one of the most interesting things that I learned there was they let me write a chunk of a brief that was going to an appellate court. And it was a case that eventually went to the Supreme Court. And I remember the head of the unit that I worked with, she came to me and said, you have all the facts in the law, and that's great, but I want you to pick one of the people affected by this law, one, the most urgent, the most compelling, and I want you to tell her story as you are doing all of this. And I remember thinking, really? Like, you want me to talk about her personal life and what she went through and her emotions? And she said, yes, I want you to start with that. I want the judges to picture this woman in this situation, what she went through, and how this law affected her, and then weave in the arguments. And I never imagined that, constitutional briefs dealing with constitutional law would actually be that personal, like telling that personal story. But anyway, that's the long winding road back to why I have to plot, because that's how I was trained to write. And so I always start with the plot, and then I build the rest of it in.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I tried plotting one time. So I had my first book, The Bookseller, was published, and I got a 3-book contract. And so I was like, well, crap, I'm a real writer now. I can't just sit down and make stuff up. So I got a little notebook, and I plotted out this killer was a priest driving around France in his minivan, administering, whatever he was, but kidnapping people and killing them. And then I wrote the book, and there was no priest, there was no minivan. Everything took place within the middle of Paris. It's just like I'd wasted 2 weeks of my life. and learn for myself, I think, a very valuable lesson. That maybe it's just the way my mind works. I also, even though I'm a lawyer like you, I actually was trained as a journalist initially.
Oh.
Everybody
so
knows
you
they make.
approach it very differently then.
Yeah, they just make stuff up all the time anyway.
All fake news.
Fake news. But I really think the two things combined, journalism and law, are why I'm able to get away with what I can, with, I think I said to somebody last night, I published 11 books in 8 years.
Wow.
I just very, very quickly, partly because I was used to writing to deadline.
Right.
I think as a lawyer, you tend to write a bit more sparingly, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, you've got your necessary elements, and the rest of it you just kind of cut out.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are all kinds of writers and that's why there are so many different types of books. And I'm the first to admit that I'm not a literary writer. I like to write in first person or very close third person. And actually, my first thriller, there's virtually no description of any room, home, anything. Like no description of any setting. It's all internal thoughts and conversations with people and analyses of the dynamics going on within the family and the plot moving forward. Because it's the thing that I dread the most if I have to describe like a tree in an interesting way.
Yeah.
I don't have the training for it. It's not in my toolbox. I'm getting better at it. But it's not really in my toolbox. It's like the tiny screwdriver in my toolbox.
Wendy,
It's a
Other tools that are much bigger, and I take them out and use them. But that one,
you may have just answered a question. We had a question from someone who's watching, from Anissa, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, asking if there's another genre that you've ever wanted to write in, maybe for both of you. You have written, Mark, you've written nonfiction, but what about it, Wendy? Have you wanted to write in any other genre?
Well, I wrote a historical novel set in Amsterdam during the war.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's pretty good.
And it had to kind of do with Anne Frank and all that stuff. And my daughter, this was a couple of years ago, was very into Anne Frank and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave her the manuscript to read, and she's like, "It's good, but your main character's too old. He's not 32. He's 16." I'm like, "I wrote a YA novel." She's like, "You've got to change it." And so I did. I changed it, and it took a bit of doing. It's much better. It's in the hands of an agent now.
Oh, great.
But wow. Yeah, I sort of unwittingly wrote a YA novel.
Right, by accident. Yeah.
That's how incompetent I am. I can write a whole novel and not mean to.
And what do you find easier to write, your series or your standalones?
Probably the series, and such that I know exactly what every character. I've got Hugo's the main character and like 4 or 5 supporting characters. I always know how they're going to react to things, what they're going to do, how they're going to irritate each other. That sort of part of the process is so much easier. I can really focus less on building character and more on the plot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are you going to write a series?
No, I've never had well, the thing about my books is my characters are always, they've been through so much that I can't imagine putting them through something else. And I think for a series, you really do need to have, if it's in the suspense genre, a lawyer, a doctor, a psychologist, a forensic psychologist, FBI, someone in the government, someone who the bad stuff is not happening to them.
Right.
In every book, or if it's happening to them in every book, it's because they're in the line of duty somehow. Right. But if you take a civilian and then you put them through a kidnapping or something horrible, then I think it's hard to do that to them in another book. It's almost unrealistic. Like, gosh, this person has a really bad luck, So there's one character who's a forensic psychologist in Emma in the Night, and I have thought about writing a book with her again. And I just actually wrote a short Audible original, which is coming out next week, called Hold Your Breath. It'll be out on the 1st of October, and it's a short. And I brought back my psychiatrist from All Is Not Forgotten. And he was one of my favorite characters to write. And you know what? You're absolutely right. It was so easy to write him because I already knew him so well. And even though it's really a standalone, so I had to do some, you know, for someone who hasn't read All Is Not Forgotten, I had to do some like catching up for them of why he is where he is. But otherwise it was really fun to write. You know,
Yeah.
do you do that? Do you, when you are writing, like you've written so many of these now, do you feel like if it's a reader who just picks up your latest book, how do you go about bringing them into his backstory and his personality without boring or sort of being annoying to your other readers who are like, I know that already? You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I probably do it less and less with each book. The best way for me to do it is Hugo has a best friend who's incredibly annoying. And I can do a lot of exposition through him, you know, using bad language and irritating behavior, just to make it a bit more interesting. But I wonder if you'll find with your short, bringing back a character. The one thing that was really, one of the great benefits of a series is having somebody pick up the book and go, oh, I've really missed Hugo. I'm so happy to have him back again. And it's like, that's nice.
Yeah.
You may experience that with bringing your psychiatrist back.
Mark, someone wanted to know, if they wanted to read your books, do they need to read them in order? Or you can jump in?
No, I've specifically written each one so it can be a standalone.
Right. Okay.
You know, I usually recommend starting with the first one because I really like it, but
yeah.
But no, you can read them in any order.
Okay, good to know.
I think that's the trick to being really successful in that, in writing a series, is that if someone starts in the middle or the beginning or the end and they get hooked on the character, they'll then go back and read the other ones. And if they don't have to be read in order, then, you know, they can just pick up one. Because if you have a lot and you have to read them in order, it can feel overwhelming to have to start at the beginning. So I think that's a great approach. I tried to do that with the short. It is a short, so you know it definitely is a standalone. But his personality, it's written in first person, and his personality comes through. He's not particularly likable. That's not the appeal of his stories, but he's entertaining, and there are a lot of twists and turns. So
that reminds me. I know we're going to run out of time before too long. I did want to mention one of the characters in your book, who I've never read a character like it before, Alice.
Yes.
Can you talk about her or not?
Of course. So my last stint as a lawyer was in family law, and I sort of fell into it because I was out in the suburbs, and after 14 years not practicing law, again, I went where they would take me. And so I got trained as a guardian ad litem, which involved really learning about psychological disorders that affect families, but also how they then manifest in children and how to identify sort of sociopathic behavior in children. And that's not as heavy-handed a word as most people assume it is. Sociopathic illnesses run on a wide spectrum, from just, you know, mild personality disorders to, you know, all out, you know, what we call the psychopaths, serial killers, what have you. And so Alice is on that spectrum, and she's on the spectrum clearly because she's had a very unusual childhood starting from birth. And so Molly, who's a teacher, starts to pick up on her behavior, on the sort of the tears that don't feel real, that feel as though they're manufactured. The empathy that she expresses is like mimicked, which is what sociopathic people do. And so writing her as a child before she's honed those skills, like an adult who has a sociopathic illness like narcissism or all of them, they have learned how to mimic empathy because they lack empathy. And they know they start to figure out as small children that they lack empathy because they can see, like, oh, a child fell off the swing. All the other children are running, crying, calling for help, you know, upset. And I feel nothing. I feel nothing at all. and they start to intuitively know that they are different, and they don't want to be different. We don't want to be different. We want to fit in. We want to have friends. So what people with a lack of empathy, they just intuitively start to learn it the way we learn anything, the way we learn language. It's something they are missing in their hardwiring of their brain, and they start to, oh, okay, next time a child falls off the swing, I'm going to run and help the child, and I might cry. Okay, I'm going to do all those things. And so actually, you know, what's so fascinating is that adult, like true psychopaths, like the Ted Bundys of the world, the women who got away, who, you know, sort of got out of his grasp before he killed them, say that he was the most charming man they had ever been with. And what alarmed them was that he was too charming, too attentive for a man on a date. And they're like, dude, why are you still asking me about my feelings? There's something wrong with you. Like, they really, not to make light of, you know, the horrors of Ted Bundy, but they caught on. There was something about him that was off. And what was off is that he got too good at being empathetic to women. And this child is in the early stages of learning how to do that. So it's exaggerated. And so Molly's able to pick up on it. And as a teacher and a mother, she knows, so she starts to get into Alice's psychology, and that's part of it. This is not like a horror, like she's being physically and sexually abused in this house. She's being held, you know, there for a reason, and she's interacting with this child, and part of getting out is figuring out this child. So there's a lot of psychology built into the book, and that comes from my training as a family lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the mixture, like, I didn't know whether to feel sorry for Alice. I did, but then she would behave in a way that would kind of make my skin crawl.
Yeah.
And so it just, to me, it's like I say, it's one of the most original characters I've read in a long, long time.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved writing. What's that?
Was it hard to do that to a child?
No, I loved it. It was so much fun to write her because I knew people were going to react that way to her as a mother, and you know, being around children and having this training, and I knew people were going to react that way, and those chapters leading up to that one zinger at the end that would come out of her mouth, like the whole chapter would lead up to that zinger that would send a chill down Molly's spine, and I knew it would send a chill down the reader's spine. And that's a gleeful moment as a writer.
Yeah, that's what you want. That's what you want. Wendy, we had a question from someone wondering, how long did it take you to write the book between that 4-hour drive and when it was done?
So at the time I was writing a totally different novel, and then that novel didn't work, so I wrote another novel, which was The Night Before. So it was probably a year and a half later that I was finally able to sit down and write it. But all that time I was thinking about how to, you know, turn it. It was in the back of my mind, and I just had to finish these other projects. And then my editor said, "What's next?" And I said, "Well, here's a couple of ideas, and I have this one from this moment," and then it just got developed from there. So,
and then it took you to actually write once you put.
Yeah. So I started plotting it. I've been on my kids' school schedule. So once everyone was back in school in September, I started writing it. It must have been 2018, that September. And then I did a really long plot outline for my editor to make sure that she was on board with everything. And then I wrote a draft, and then she read it. And so it took, like, you know, from September, I think it was wrapped up by April, with, a solid month here and there for my editor to read it and get back to me during holidays or whatnot.
Right.
So, you know, it was, but yeah, that was the whole process once I started.
It's pretty speedy.
Yeah.
You guys are speedy. Both of you, you're super speedy. I'm jealous. I wish I could write that.
Not always. It's not always that fast, but when you have the plot and you know the characters, I think that, you know, then it, and when you're writing the way that at least the way that I write, which is more sparse, like not having to dwell on describing a setting, and not really trying to wow people with my sentence structure and, you know, my use of fancy words and just really focusing on telling the story as concisely and just with, I don't know, I like brevity. I like just and then pieces of dialogue that just try to say a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah, great, excellent.
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah, well, but Mark, did you have something else you wanted to ask? Do you want to sneak one more in?
I've got like 500 more questions, but
Pick one.
all right.
The next BoucherCon, we'll have to share a cocktail and
Are you gonna go?
next year, is it? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. I really don't know, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna, if it's up and running and it's safe, I'll be there.
Yes, if it's up and running and it's safe for me to get there. My other consideration is I still have, I'm a single mom. I still have a child at home. It'll be his senior year. So I don't like leaving teenagers alone in my house.
What's the conference called? It's sort of a.
It's called Boucher. So it's called BoucherCon. And actually, if there are any thriller writers out there, published or not published or aspiring, there are 2 conferences every year where we all gather, and there are panels and we talk about all this stuff for a solid weekend. And then you can catch us in the bar, and we're there every night holding court, talking, telling stories, sharing our experiences. And one is BoucherCon. It moves around different locations every fall. And the other is Thriller Fest, which is in New York City in July every year.
And I strongly recommend the BoucherCon just because I think something like 2,000 people go, and there are probably 400 or 500 writers.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, but it's such a great way to meet. I've met so many readers there. Really, I've always been amazed how friendly everybody is. It's where sort of, well, I'm a writer and you're just a reader. It's like everyone mingles, and it's so much fun.
That's great. Well, let's hope that it actually happens, because it sounds fantastic. All right, so I want to make sure folks know where they can get your books. So Mark, can we see The French Widow one more time? You want to hold that up? So you can find The French Widow and the rest of Mark's books at Book People in Austin, Texas, his hometown bookstore. And Wendy wanted to make sure people knew about, I'm losing it. It's Elm Street Books, right? Elm Street, okay, my paper.
They have a lot of signed copies. It's my closest local bookstore that asked me to come in and sign a ton of stock. So they have signed copies.
And that's in New Canaan, Connecticut. So if anyone's
but they'll ship, and they do shipping and all of that, but they have a lot of signed copies. Yeah, they were very, very kind to let me come in and put my mask on and sign stock and do all of that, so that people who want a signed book can get them.
That's awesome. Mark, does Book People have signed copies of your books?
They have signed copies of all of every book in the series and a whole bunch of the new ones. So yeah.
Okay, awesome, great, excellent. So that's where to get the books. You can also get them via bookshop.org, through the Mighty Blaze. I don't know, what is it called? Our storefront. If you want to use that, go that route. So, well, thank you guys both so much. This was great. I loved hearing the conversation and hearing about your books, and I'm super excited.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Take care, y'all. So long, everybody out there. We'll see you next week.